Thank you all so much for coming in and for tonight's final session of number 10 of 10 questions. And as this is our very final session, I thought I wanted to start first with asking that all of you join me in thanking the two people, again, hugely responsible for making this happen. Come on up, Anne-Marie Burke, Victoria Marks. As you all know, the inventors, the instigators, the researchers, the coordinators, the choreographers of this terrific event over 2.5 months. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much for this. It's just been great. And in conversation with them, we thought tonight's question, what is a university, would be a terrific summation and ultimate session following on from last week's on knowledge. And I hope in certain ways that the arc of this course has offered many of you implicit, unstated suggestions for how to answer the question of what a university might be. I think what we do know for sure is that universities aren't just places where questions can be posed or poised. They are places where, like this course, questions can be foregrounded as a basis for the thinking of, the production of, the learning, the teaching, the dissemination of ideas about our world. I just have to thank all of you for being a part of this over the last 2.5 months to help us test that thesis and to lead up to tonight's final session. Whatever else they are, universities are remarkably old. They are incredibly stable, settled, and arguably malleable in how they configure themselves in relation to this central idea of them being homes for the production, the sharing, the dissemination of knowledge. If we were to look back over the last 1,000 years in which universities have existed in a form not unlike the 420 acres here at UCLA that they exist in the early 21st century, you will see that universities are places for remarkable human invention and intervention. If we look back 10 years to a university in a place like Yemen, you will see students stand up and protest for change that became a catalyst to something like what we think of now as the Arab Spring in 2011. 50 years ago, in a setting like this in Westwood at UCLA, or our sister campuses in the UC system and across America, students stood up and protested forms of social injustice and argued for forms of change that were delivered not just on campuses like this, but all across America in the late 1960s. That's 50 years ago. If we go back 100 years before that, universities are places where a project like broad public literacy is brought to the world, where it is embedded into the world in ways that we know it today. 100 years before that, universities in cities like Paris became the birthplace for those modern professions that we think of as modern life itself, where things like engineering, medicine, and many other fields are given form and appearance in a modern world. We can play that game further and further back in history. 500 years ago, universities at places like Oxford found presses whose purpose is to disseminate, to produce and disseminate knowledge in radically mobile forms, which they did in things called books, which were once printed in arcane languages that a very few privileged people could read, but which very quickly morphed into presses that generated words and knowledge in many forms, pamphlets, brochures, and others, that are the basis for things that we look at today and call the Enlightenment, for example. That's 500 years ago. 500 years before that, in medieval England and other parts of Europe, universities appear for the first time, and only after they are given appearance in places like Asia and across Africa, and in a city like Fez that to this day is recognized as the oldest degree-granting university in the world. It's been offering degrees for over 1,000 years. It's at those early medieval institutions across Europe that one of the seminal ideas of all university life is given birth. an idea of academic freedom. I mention all of that to simply say, as we pose the question tonight about what a university is, and that we pose in a way to help us think about the next 100 years and the second 100 years of the life of a place like UCLA, what we're reminded is simply what a long arc it is that a place like this sits in relation to around this question of what a university is, how it produces knowledge, how it transmits that in the forms of teaching and learning that you students are all a part of every day, and how we find ways to conserve, protect, and store that knowledge for future generations to turn upside down in interesting ways, which they do in university libraries and other kinds of settings. That's the general thesis for tonight's conversation. We have 4 absolutely terrific and distinguished guests who are going to help us do the hard work of answering the question in a way more interesting way that I could suggest in an intro like this. And I want to just take this moment to invite our 4 guests up here on stage this evening. Everybody, Robert Watson, Bryonn Bain, David Schaberg, and Jerry Kang. Come on up, you guys. Please, come on up. Thank you so much for coming in. As I do every week, I'm going to do a brief introduction for our 4 guests. We will begin the conversation with a presentation by each of our guests and then open it up to all of you in the room. I'll begin with Bryonn Bain, who joins us. Bryonn is a poet, prison activist, actor, educator, and hip-hop theater innovator, and the professor in the departments of African American Studies and World Arts and Cultures, Dance. Bryonn is the founding director of the UCLA Prison Education Program and a supervisor for the International Human Rights Law Clinic. His theater productions critique what race, prisons, poverty, and privilege mean in America today and the increasingly visible injustices of the US criminal system. Everybody, Bryonn Bain. Woo woo. Thank you. Jerry Kang, in the middle chair here. Jerry is a legal scholar and professor of law, professor of Asian American Studies, the inaugural Korea Times Endowed Chair, and UCLA's inaugural Vice Chancellor of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. A leading scholar on implicit bias in the law, Jerry regularly collaborates with leading experimental social psychologists on wide-ranging scholarly, educational, and advocacy projects. Everybody, Jerry Kang. Thank you so much for joining us. David Schaberg, here to my left, is a scholar of comparative literature and dean of humanities and professor in Asian languages and cultures. David's research explores early Chinese literature, historiography, and philosophy, as well as Greek, Chinese comparative issues. His most recent work addresses the history of oratory and ritual speech genres in early China. Everybody, David Schaberg. Thank you. And finally, Robert Watson is a Shakespeare scholar, poet, and distinguished professor here at UCLA. Robert has served as Associate Dean of Humanities, Associate Vice Provost of Educational Innovation, and Chair of the Faculty of UCLA's College of Letters and Science. His research focuses on Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, fear of death, the Renaissance roots of modern environmentalism, and Japanese cinema, the role of arts and humanities in cultural evolution. And by coincidence, and is a wonderful way to summarize an introduction, his latest book, Cultural Evolution and Its Discontents, Cognitive Overload, Parasitic Cultures, and the Humanistic Cure, is out today. So thank you for sharing today with us, Robert. These are our 4 guests. As we do every week, we're going to start with brief presentations. I've been giving a running order, and if I'm right, David Schaberg will begin tonight's presentation. David?
I'm going to try to keep track of time. If I go much beyond 10 minutes, please remind me and move in such a way as to let me know I'm doing something wrong. I don't want to dominate the conversation too much. when offered this lovely opportunity to participate in the conversation, I, of course, chose the topic, what is a university? That, to me, is the juiciest of all questions at this moment. And I thought about various analogies we might adopt for a university. You might think of it as a library collection with a number of specialists working around it and educating students in it. You might possibly imagine it as an endowment with a number of people preserving it over a period of generations and centuries. For me, approaching this question of what a great educational institution is and can be and why it should be what it is meant going back to my sources, to the texts that I fell in love with as a young scholar and that continue in some ways to inform the way I think about the world. So I thought I'd introduce a couple of those things to you, draw out some implications, and then turn it over to the rest of the group to see what kind of conversation comes up with all of the other presentations as well. Jerry.
Your jacket, you have such a beautiful jacket. It's kind of in the back. I just wanted to make sure that the film
Thank
looks
you, Jerry.
good.
Good.
It's because I care.
Excellent. Okay. Remember that, yes, counseling on presentation is very important. Thank you for that. Let's look into this first text. It's a bit dense. I'll take you through it. Please don't attempt to read it directly. I'll just lead it through. What we have here is in the year 542 BC, an encounter between the chief administrator of the state, let's say a provost or EVC type character, and some of the people who, one of the persons who works for him. And the problem is that in the local community schools of this state in central China, people are gathering freely after their work hours and discoursing upon the government. In fact, they're discoursing critically upon the government. So one of the assistants to this administrators comes in and says, "This is what's happening. Shall we go ahead and shut down those local community centers, those schools?" And that word there, the village meeting places, there, xiao, is a word that gets taken over for school in later contexts. So that question comes up. Free critique is taking place. People are being drawn into these centers and are engaging very freely in critique. What should we do? Shall we shut them down? No, says the chief administrator. We can't do that. We shouldn't do that. First of all, they've worked hard all day. Why should we stop them from gathering freely to debate? Once they've done that debating, I will carry out whatever they deem to be good policies, and I will amend or take away whatever they regard as bad. Pointing up that phrase for a special reason, I'll come back to it. They are my teachers. Why should we dismantle the village meeting places? I've heard of using loyalty and goodness to diminish resentment, but I haven't heard of assuming the forceful pose of authority to block resentment. Wouldn't forceful authority swiftly put a stop to resentment? And then he goes into a kind of metaphor of trying to keep water down, of trying to dam water up. You might think of the Dutch boy putting his finger in a dike. How can it be stopped if there's enough pressure of opinion and of critique among the people? How would you ever succeed by simply shutting off the access to critique and to expression? Ranming takes the lesson. He says, "Henceforth I know that you, sir, are truly one whom I should serve. I am indeed a petty man," a very polite expression. Later on, Confucius, the great teacher, and this would have been later by several decades, is supposed to have heard this story and to have confirmed that Zichan, who is renowned as a very effective and sometimes a harsh administrator, was in this case behaving as a humane person. This is the highest the highest term of praise in Confucius's vocabulary. To declare this person humane is a true endorsement from Confucius. Now, going back to that phrase that I brought out a bit here earlier, I will then carry out whatever they deem to be good policies and amend whatever they regard as bad. Later on, in the sayings of Confucius, there's a saying in which he says, if three people are walking together, I'm bound to find my teacher there. And then says the equivalent of this. I'll look to the one who has a good model and follow that. I'll look to the one who's setting a negative example, and I'll make sure not to do those things. There's a bit of echoing, a bit of allusion here. And in fact, scholars are not sure whether this text comes first or the Analects, the attribution of that idea to Confucius comes first. In short, though, what we have here is a sense of social pressures that compares them, and this is not the only place, compares them to the pressure of water building up. And there's a very old metaphor in China of flooding as disorder, as a kind of disorder that then requires a kind of sage to come in and make order, to channel pressures in the right direction, and to set up structures that allow pressures of social critique to be channeled in a stable way. I'm not endorsing this model, I'm just drawing it as one model for what a university can do, and pointing out that it has some very strong endorsement from within the tradition, in the voice of Confucius. I'm going to call that the hydraulic model, a model that recognizes the existence of independent, critical thought everywhere, not just in the university, not just among our students, everywhere. Every person has a form of the humanities, I say as a representative of the humanities, every person has a form of critique. This model recognizes that and attempts to account for the pressure of freely exercised opinion without suppressing it or attempting to suppress it, and benefiting from it along the way. Take that as one notion of what an educational institution can be. Then look at a very different, or somewhat different model, let's say. This is from a later text, Han Dynasty text, probably 2nd century BC. Very typical text in the way it's ordered. If you start to look through it, you'll see a strong parallelism. That is, in the every year we'll do this, every second year we'll do that. Then we get down to the students here. In the first year, it was seen whether they could read texts intelligently. Please notionally apply this to yourself as we're going. In the first year, it was seen whether they could read texts intelligently, what was the meaning of each. In the third year, whether they were reverently attentive to their work and what companionship was most pleasant to them, and so on and so forth, with a program very parallelistically organized. And in the Chinese, it's a perfect kind of parallelism. Very parallelistically organized around a set of goals for education, right? How do you cultivate people? It's like raising crops. It's like farming intelligence. I call this model the cybernetic model. You could call it a mechanistic model as well. As I say, the prose in Chinese is highly parallelistic. So in Chinese, it feels extremely mechanistic. In the third year, this. In the fifth year, this. This kind of prose is very common in classical Chinese. Applied to education here, and applied to education as a state function, it bespeaks a deep sort of faith in what can be done with thorough central planning. And the idea behind it is that what one is doing in recognizing and cultivating talent, in raising talent to the next level, in checking the criteria of success at every level, is preparing students, in this case, for government service. That is the end goal of education in early China. Applied to our world, the notion of this machine, let's say a machine of social mobility, you may have heard that notion of what the university is to be and what UCLA is. This machine functions to create the greatest citizens we can possibly create. That is one of the implicit goals of the university. So I take these things together, models from a very different cultural space, but a space where, first of all, the presence of critique in everyone, the presence of a critical spirit in every person is recognized. The problem of channeling the social energy of critique is recognized. And a notion of the end point of that channeling is also recognized. And it becomes a sort of total system for thinking about what education is. It's also a very statist system. It's organized around the needs of the government. I don't adopt that part of the model. What I want to take over for our consideration tonight is the sense of freedom that comes up somewhat unexpectedly in that first passage. An early Chinese text, a text attributing language to someone speaking in 542 BC, is not the first place you would expect to see an emphasis on freedom. But it's there. And it's there because the Chinese had come to the conclusion that a direct attempt to suppress would never work, that it would always backfire. And they had plenty of historical examples of this, even at this time. In the university context, adapting this as an analogy, I want to talk about how this institution, perhaps uniquely, protects at its center a freedom from political influence, a freedom from economic utility, a freedom even from the kinds of criteria we might apply to each other, to judging each other's choice of how to spend free time. At the center of the university, and necessary for the survival of the university, is a special space where we don't say, why are you doing that? Why do you have to do that? A center where, thank you, a central space where without the assurance of freedom, without someone saying to you, you must follow your thoughts where they go, you must follow your critique where it will take you, the work of the university cannot take place. This becomes clear in a really non-vague, fuzzy way when you look at how development works and when you look at how fundraising works on this campus. It is relatively easy to go and say, excuse me, wealthy donor, would you like to give money for this directly useful project that you see the use of? Would you like to fund something as if it were a contract on campus? It's relatively easy to do. To get the fantastically generous people who surround UCLA to support the purest part of our endeavor, whether it's basic science on South Campus, that is, I'm investigating the mechanics of the physiology of breathing. I don't know how it's going to cure a disease, but we need to understand this if we ever hope to cure asthma and similar diseases. To get the funding for that, for the free part of the research, the free pursuit of curiosity, is much harder. To get funding for the direct thing that happens in a classroom like this, the free discussion, the conversation that will happen later without a particular goal-oriented end, that's difficult. And it's partly because that is exactly the thing that we protect from profit-seeking motives, political ends. That is the thing that we hold up. It is the soul of the university, the assurance and the exercise of freedom, not only by faculty whose academic freedom is guaranteed in certain ways, but by students whose academic freedom is guaranteed, and indeed by any member of the university community. You step on this campus, and it is presumed that it is your right to speak and to win or lose, not on the basis of your strength or your money or your connections, but on the basis of the free exercise of reasoning, of thinking of the best kind. That a university can hold up for society a model of that kind of sociability, of that kind of interaction, is one of our basic functions. And it's the thing that will guarantee or ensure, as much as can be ensured, the survival of the university. It's the thing that a university like UCLA that has very strong practices of faculty governance, shared governance, can be proud of as we look around the world, because it is not the case that universities everywhere guarantee this. So the university is the place for the well-supported, highly institutionalized exercise of something that in a certain way cannot be institutionalized, and that's that center point of freedom. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
David, thank you. Thank you. It's great. Thank you, David, so much. Everybody, Jerry Kang.
So, wow, hydraulic model, mechanistic model. What is the university? I'm going to make 8 points. I tried to make 10 to make analogies to 10 questions. I started late, 8 points. Number one, what is the university? Hey, I like to think of it as a city-state. A city-state actually on a hill. I know that's a loaded phrase, but city-state on a hill. That's how I want you to think about a university. Now, I was an academic since 1995 here. I've been a law professor for a long time. I studiously avoided administration, so I used to think about the university as just the people who force you to do paperwork while you were doing your research. But since 2015, I've been a vice chancellor for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Like Title IX reports to me. I investigate faculty for race discrimination, everything that deals with freedom of speech, every controversial speaker we have to be thoughtful about. I've had to deal with really hard questions, and I've had to own what it means to actually make the wrong decisions or to actually fail to be responsive quick enough, and the disasters that could actually flow from that. So I had to learn how a university operates in an intimate way, and I just assumed that it was kind of like a firm where you have, I don't know, IBM, Microsoft, and people would just kind of, at the top, the chancellor guy would say stuff and would be able to dictate. It's not anywhere close. The university is instead a city. It's a city-state. You have, you've got executives, legislatures, senators, students. It's an odd city-state. You've got a lot of young people and then a lot of old people. People who think that they're, again, quite learned. And the currencies of power that flows within this city look a little bit different. Usually you think about money, right? It's all about money. It's all about votes. It's not just about money. Money's important, don't get me wrong. But you've got, again, state legislatures. You've got regents. You've got football. You've got all these other currencies that allow you to mediate power. But I want you to think, most importantly, of the university as a city-state. Not quite a standard state, not quite the marketplace where it's just dollars, not quite family, although themes of local parentis, of what it means to have people who are supposedly in charge, acting in a parental role vis-a-vis younger people, right, are important. It's different but similar. It is a city-state. That's number one. Point number two, essence. What is the essence of a university? So I'm not sure if actually Hannibal Lecter actually said this in The Silence of the Lambs, but what I remember is, of each thing, ask, what is its essence? I think he cites Marcus Aurelius. Some of you learned people would know. So the point is, of each thing, ask, what is its essence, Clarice? You know, so I'm dating myself, but it's a popular film. I think in some ways it's artificial to suggest there's only one essence, only one mechanism, one function of an institution as complex as a city-state. But we have to pick and choose and interpret what is the essence of a university. And before I started as an administrator, I'd probably give you a different answer. But now, I think one of its core essences, and the ones that I want to unpack, is that it acts as a bulwark against catastrophe, right? I just want you to think about that. Institutions around us are failing badly. Pick an institution, they are failing. Can the university act as a civic institution that actually saves us, that shows that there is a different path, a different way, when everything else is going to hell? Can the university be a city-state on a hill? That's the question. Number three, exceptionalism. Right? When I say, you know, a city on a hill, you don't have to learn a lot of history to know that oftentimes we talk about America as, again, that exceptional state, a city on a hill. I'm an immigrant. I'm first gen. The fact that I could be, you know, a distinguished professor or a vice chancellor in one generation when my parents, you know, didn't get anything in terms of education, had no opportunity. It's a remarkable story, and for that, I am deeply grateful to America and what it stands for. But I also am a deep critic of what America has been able to do, in part because I demand from America everything that it claims itself to be, because it sets itself up so high. So I will never let easy claims of exceptionalism go without critique. But the question I want to ask is, can there be UCLA exceptionalism? Can UCLA as a university be exceptional? Can it be that institution that teaches us to do something different, to actually solve a set of problems, a set of hydraulic pressures that clearly exist within our society, and actually funnel them, arguably mechanistically, towards a particular objective or goal that makes us worthy of exceptionalism, right? It is not a descriptive given, it is a normative aspiration. And the question is, can you actually achieve what you so easily and pleasingly claim to be? That's number three. Number four, and let's get mechanistic. I think what is at the core of a university is it has to teach us how to address conflict. The hydraulic pressures of free thinking and different views, right, has generated enormous conflict. Conflict has global, national manifestations that reverberate locally here, but conflict is all around us. And here's my anxiety. I'm not sure the center can actually hold any longer. Do we have anything like an overlapping political consensus? When John Rawls talks about that idea, political philosopher, do we have it, right? Do we actually share values? Do we really share values any longer? Outside of, again, these easy, pleasing banalities that are viewed as principles, commitments. Do we actually share anything politically? That's one question. Besides values, do we actually share facts? Are we actually living in an evidence-based or a fact-based or a reality-based world on all sides? And the undermining of those commitments happen both on the left and the right, and you got to own it if you start playing those games in all kinds of ways. Do we know how to resolve contested questions of fact? Because if our values no longer overlap, and we no longer have any capacity to resolve contested questions of fact, where are we? What do you expect the world to become if we do not share values and do not know how to resolve contested questions of fact? Number 5, I think the university, one of its mechanistic goals, has to also be to teach us how to inculcate a specific virtue. Now, my book of business is equity, diversity, and inclusion, and when I talk about a particular kind of virtue, most people will think immediately I'm talking about social justice. I'm actually not going there right now. I'll go there later. It's just point 5, and I've got 3 minutes. Point 5, right? I'm actually thinking about the virtue of, how shall I say it? The virtue of not losing your mind. But that means a lot of different things. I'm trying to be somewhat playful here. But you have a mind. Through hustle, through good luck, through sacrifices from your community and your parents, you arrived here because you have a mind. You have an obligation then ethically to exercise your intelligence. It has to be cool to use your mind, to actually solve problems and conflicts differently because you have a mind. And I'm not sure we recognize that fully as an ethical obligation. And what that ethical obligation requires you to do is to actually start learning all kinds of things, not only the knowledge that has been produced by the university, but learning a central aspect of critical thinking, which is the possibility that you might be wrong. Like, it might be the case that you're wrong. But how would you know? How would you ever ask and answer the question whether your values are right or wrong? How would you ever ask and answer the question whether your facts are wrong? If you have no possibility of engaging that question in good faith, you have lost your mind, or you never gained it. You have an ethical obligation not to lose your mind, and we as a university have to teach that. Point number 7, almost done. I think another thing consistent with all this, which is again thinking about how to address conflict, how to make sure that we use and not lose our mind, is to recognize that when we use our minds, we take things to another level. Here's another way to think about things. The point of a university, right, and its interesting tools of knowledge production and research is to make the invisible visible, right? That's what research has taught us how to do. So I got no mind for history. I don't time index anything. Most of my personal memory feels like 2-minute clips on YouTube with no date stamp. I know it happened, I just don't know when. So when Brett starts off with, imagine 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, 1,500 years ago, he's making the invisible, because none of us was there, he's making the invisible in some ways visible. To see ancient texts in script that you probably cannot read, translated and interpreted, is in some ways to make the invisible visible. If you are doing, again, microscopy, you're seeing small things. It makes the invisible visible. If you're doing big data analysis, like running high-level regressions and factor analysis and hierarchical linear modeling, you're seeing vectors of causation on data that allows you to see things that you would never be able to see with your own eyes. The whole point of knowledge, the whole point of using your mind is to see that which you could not see. If you care about equity, diversity, and inclusion, the fact that you can't see the structures, you can't see how the highways bisected cities that left one side rich, the other side poor, that you can't see the time evolution of advantage, why it is that privilege actually goes from generation to generation in unintended but deeply replicating ways. If you can't see that, you can't see what the deal is. And part of your challenge, as a student certainly, is to gain the skills to see that which you could not see, but for the education you receive here. Finally, I think that was 0.6, right? That was 7? No, that was 6. I'm sorry. Now I'm going to 7, and because I'm really done. Yeah, it's about to beep. I think she silenced it. That was 6. I can't. I'm enumerate, apparently. My undergraduate degree is in physics. 7, how to create, here's the final thing, right? And again, so this is the telos, or the function. I want to say 7. One other thing that I think is really, really important for the university is, I'll just call it how to create a fair shot, because it turns out this is where the equity, diversity, inclusion part comes in, and it's what I really care about, right? So what is the point of knowledge production? Like, there was a time when I used to think, like, yeah, I'm all about that. I'm all about irrelevant stuff. Right? I'm just joking. But I used to embrace it. Like, who cares about relevance? Like, I want to study proton decay. I want to study ancient stuff. Like, I don't really need any relevant stuff. Only, again, irritatingly small-minded people would demand a functional engineering-like payoff to every little question. I pitch a big tent. I'm Catholic with a small c on ideas. I like the big questions. I don't need a materialistic payoff on everything that I do. I don't need to defend my curiosity, and I used to embrace that. Now, here's the thing where I pivoted, in part because I'm an administrator now, where I actually now seek desperately also, not necessarily mutually exclusive, also a relevant knowledge. A relevant knowledge purposefully targeted at creating a fair shot. And I think one of the things that universities do great, right, do really well, in its ideal, is because it understands that it's trying to convey to all of you the skills necessary to make the invisible visible, to actually engage each other across conflict, that what it does is it gives people the possibility of success, a trajectory that allows you to have a fair shot. And actually in Los Angeles, I think in America right now, that has to be a critically important mission. So I have to say, as an administrator, I'm always thinking, how am I building the environment to give everyone a fair shot? And that's a question that I ask all the time as a university administrator about this city on a hill that I actually didn't ask as an academic as much. I conclude finally, 8. What is the university? That's the question. This is the university, right? This is, and I'm sure I stole the punchline from everyone, right? This is the very best example of what a university is. To have relatively interesting people talk earnestly, like after decades and decades of intellectual research and decades of lived experience that is embodied in their actual actions, their actual speech, the spittle that comes out of their mouths, to try to get people out here who are students or staff who are members of the community actually engaged across difference, right? To deal with the hydraulic challenges, that's what a university is. And for the opportunity to engage in just that conversation, I'm deeply thankful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, so much. Everybody, Bryonn Bain.
All right. Peace, family. How y'all feeling? That's it? How y'all feeling? Good. All right. I want to start by honoring the Tongva Nation, the indigenous people who are on this land before any of us, as far as we know. I think it's important to have a conversation about what a university is, to start off by acknowledging the folks on at this land-grant institution who occupied this land before we arrived on it. I also want to answer this question. You won't be surprised, as an artist and cultural worker, I want to answer the question using art and culture. And so it's important to me to recognize, we talk about the university and what it actually is, and to reconcile that with what we aspire for it to be. For me, someone who recognizes that for most of this country's colonial history, people who look like me were not allowed to participate in the university. It is important that we talk about the process of decolonization and recognizing what needs to change to get us from what the university is to what we aspire for it to be. So the word that comes to mind for me is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a South African word, which in an academic sense means the universal bond of sharing that all humanity has. And in a more folk interpretation, it means we are, and so I am. So I'm gonna need some help to get this started. So When I say what is a university, everybody over here say we are. What is a university? We are. Can y'all do better than that? Because that sounds like the remedial section, all right? I'll say, so I'm gonna say, what is a university? Y'all are gonna say? We are. And then you're gonna say, and so I am. Can y'all try that? And so I am. What is a university? We are. And so I am. Okay, all right. When Angela Davis gave her famous lectures on liberation right up the hill in Royce Hall in 1969, she included in those lectures a comment about the importance of including Black studies and Black people in thinking about freedom. And she, in essence, said that you need to make sure when you think about what freedom means in a philosophical and an abstract sense that you involve people in the conversation who have the experience of unfreedom. Because those who have the experience of unfreedom, right, have a remarkable insight to offer that conversation and that discourse. So making the analogy to that really insightful point that she made, I want to offer to you that as we think about what is a university, it is essential that we bring into the conversation those who have been left out of the opportunity to participate in the creation of the university in this country, right? Not the creation in the sense of construction, because you know we built most of these buildings, right? You know, all right, you know it was Black and brown folks who was building these, putting the bricks and mortar in place, right? Even though we wasn't expected to be in the classroom or teaching the classes, right? But we need to involve those folks in the conversation, right? Ancient Greece, celebrated for elevating democracy, had most of its population not able to participate in that democracy. Women weren't voting, right? Foreigners weren't voting, right? I'm the child of immigrants, right? So how do we bring those folks into the conversation? Among the folks who are systematically left out of that conversation more than anybody else, of course, along lines of race, gender, class, sexuality, we recognize this is an all-male panel. I want to recognize that and acknowledge that there are no women here. That those voices are a part of this conversation, need to be uplifted as well. Folks who are incarcerated. In the country that incarcerates more people than any other country in the world, are folks who offer unique insight. For the last 20 years, since Bill Clinton cut all the federal funding for education, higher education programs in prisons, right, we have had a disconnect, right, except for those opportunities that private foundations gave us. We had a disconnect between those who are among the most marginalized people in this nation, the over 2.3 million people who are incarcerated, 7 to 8 million people who are under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system in this country. Right, those folks have been disconnected from us. So part of what the work that I've been brought here to do in developing the prison education program is to bring those folks into conversation. So I'm going to yield the rest of my time to women at the California Institute for Women, the oldest prison for women in the state of California, and allow you to have an eye into their experience of the university. In the first pilot course that UCLA offered, I was blessed to teach in 2016 in Chino at the California Institute for Women. If we can kill the lights, we'll watch the video.
My name is Jennifer. I'm from Orange County.
Linda, San Francisco, California, 94121.
My name's Diane. I'm from Forest Hill, California, 95613.
Hello, my name is Angela. I'm from 29 Palms, California, 92277.
Tina Marie, Chino, California, 91710.
My name is Thamicha. I'm from South Central Los Angeles, 90037.
My name is Paige. I'm from Vallejo, California, and my zip code is 94590.
Our first class, where both the UCLA students and the CIW students will finally meet and be joined, will be next week. So one of the big discoveries is that both groups are feeling the same way about one another, even though they haven't met yet. You know, students are asking, well, you know, what are the UCLA students like, or what are the CIW students like? And so this way we can sort of dispel any sort of ideas and preconceived, you know, perceptions about one another.
2 and 3. We, the people, in cases of group tyranny, will not sustain penalties for our innocence no more.
while we're in here, we have a lot of downtime. We can work and we can go to groups at night, but if we come out of here without an education, we will come out the same way we came in. And if we come out the same way we came in, we will never be able to make a difference. We will never be able to right our wrongs or grow and give back to our families as well.
And then what else? Promote general welfare, Kim. Okay, how does this promote? You got to make the argument. Something in there promotes general welfare.
It's one thing to be able to argue your side, but when you understand the opposition side as well, then you can better argue your point as well.
And you're able to kind of like put yourself in other people's shoes, even if you don't like understand their ways or their ideas.
So I've been incarcerated for 10 years, and I think this class has really brought myself back to me. I have experienced such joy and look so forward to going to class every week. And I've been introduced to these wonderful authors, Angela Davis, James Baldwin, Paulo Freire. We've done theater games in the class, which have been so enjoyable.
Educating inmates is a worthy investment because 96% of inmates will return to the community.
We're going to introduce Professor Kelly Lado Hernandez to actually take us into the next part of class.
This is a painting that was created in 1872 by a man named Thomas Gast. And what he was doing was he was thinking about the expansion of the United States.
Oh, well, the students are brilliant. I don't know if there's another word to use. That I came in with a set of documents that they had to digest very, very quickly and look at just briefly, and their analysis was absolutely on point. That these are documents that would take me 10 weeks to get to, often in a course that I teach at UCLA, and we did it in 10 minutes here.
I think the experience with UCLA helped better my self-worth. It encouraged me that I could still be a student, that I can still learn, that those things that were important to me out there are still important to me today.
Stand up and be counted, counted out of society. Society never gave a damn dope dealer of razor wire sunsets and concrete lullabies. Lull you to a comatose state, your name for the record. Record a litany of sins written in the blood-stained stars and stripes I wear with pride at surviving this game of smoke and mirror the hypocritical policy on crime does pay, to line pockets so deep they will never be filled with stolen dreams. Dream of raising my child caught up in this system designed to subjugate instead of liberate people struggling to stand up and be counted out.
The United States Constitution in Article 1, Section 2 states, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned to the several states according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. So what does it mean to actually be counted as only 3/5 of a person? We all have 5 senses. Does that mean we could only keep 3 of them? Sight and sound are obviously too valuable to lose. Of the other 3, I would keep my sense of touch, get rid of all those bad smells, and sacrifice good tasting food for the ability to pick up objects and have good sex. Fingers. I'd like to retain my thumb and my pointer finger, purge the useless pinky finger, and just to try to maintain some sort of balance, dispense with the middle finger. Same with the toes. Those 5 stages of grief. I would eradicate denial and anger. Of the 5 days of the work week, we would certainly want to hold on to Fridays and toss Mondays. Perhaps hold on to hump day, Wednesday, just because. Let's reduce it from 5 games to 3 games in the conference level series of Major League Baseball. We can eliminate 1 guard and 1 forward from the Lakers' starting 5 since they are redundant. Of our great nation's 50 states, we can easily jettison 20 of them by wiping out the entire Midwest, and what the hell, the Bible Belt as well, just so long as we do away with Utah and Mississippi. And finally, we can abolish 4 of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Thou shalt have no idols before me. Thou shalt remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Just off the top, I'd get rid of those.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, a strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees.
Fantastic. Everyone, Robert Watson.
So I think a university is the epitome of the great and terrifying experiment called Homo sapiens, which depends on a delicate balance between control and freedom, between discipline and liberty. Anthropology has shown that cultural learning, which balances received ideas with creativity, has been the primary driver in the emergence and dominance of our species on this world. Universities reflect a recognition that neither tradition nor innovation are at their best in the absence of the other. As curators of an archive, universities stabilize our collective knowledge over time. As innovative explorers, the same universities unsettle both the structure and the content of that stored knowledge. And when new ideas and new information become available, often because formerly excluded voices are finally given a fair hearing, universities help a society adapt to changing physical and political and mental environments. Human mentalities, I think, depend on that same balance. The unique open structure of our minds provides opportunities, but carries the risk of social and psychological chaos. So we empower culture to channel and unify our behavior and our thinking, which empowerment carries risks of its own, as I'm arguing in today's book. Because clusters of ideas, like clusters of cells, undergo a Darwinian competition that favors those good at replicating and spreading themselves, not necessarily the ones that fulfill our best potential. A key function of artists and scholars is to challenge those convenient, unifying functions of culture when they mislead us, whether about facts or about ethics. So yes, we're a resistance. In the 1940s, Nazis eradicated professors across Eastern Europe, demonizing them as communists. In the late 1960s and 70s, communist tyrants in Asia massacred their intellectuals for the opposite reason. It's happening again in Myanmar. Just today, there was a story about the erasure of a university in Hungary. And the scholar's real crime was, and our real value still is, constituting an independent and prestigious entity well situated to challenge both popular assumptions and government propaganda. Scholars are in the business of breaking down assumptions, and they therefore have to compensate for that threat of chaos by practicing both discipline and disciplines. Artists similarly immerse themselves in tradition and subject themselves to form while exercising their creativity. As society starts realizing that we need some bastion against the dismissal of inconvenient truths as fake news, to pick up on Jerry's point, scholars had damn well better be ready to prove ourselves something other than snobby partisan ideologues. In the collective social body, the artist or the humanistic scholar is ideally, I think, a kind of cell, prone to mutation, but not then to the interminable blind repetition of old errors. Evolution, in other words, but not cancer. Universities should be safe spaces for the inherently unsafe business of convening different perspectives, airing and evaluating different views, and for the orderly dissemination of those views that prove to have some validity as they come out of a conversation like the one I hope we're going to have in a few minutes. Ideally, we inoculate some alert minds in the next generation, like all of you in front of the white pieces of paper out there, against the autoimmune diseases called tribalism and conformism that can turn us against what are actually healthy parts of our own body politic. To the extent we're not indoctrinating, but instead legitimately enabling resistance to an indoctrination already in progress through our society, it's important that we be honest with ourselves and communicative with the general public about the difference between those things. And honesty with ourselves does mean remaining alert to orthodoxies that constitute conformity and confer power and status within the left-leaning academy. Academia may be less an ivory tower than a kind of loamy garden, complete, let's stipulate, with a fair amount of manure produced by its domestic livestock. Our job is to try to keep alive an array of truths in all their quirky residues and implausible possibilities, all the things that seem obviously wrong, yet may someday be proven right, to keep that seed bank of ideas alive in the face of the human susceptibility to simplification that would gleefully trample those seedlings. Academic freedom, as was discussed earlier, creates a kind of a sanctuary, like the ancient monasteries, in fact, that Brett brought up at the beginning, where old truths can remain rooted despite the vicissitudes of the political world, enabling principled dissent from the current structures of power and belief, whatever those are. Scholars free from government control can be pens mightier than swords, and real pains in the asset of cultural cohesion. Well, they did get the joke. Good. Okay, I only had one joke, and that was it. Here and now, the threat to the function of universities comes wielding not swords, but spreadsheets. The common right-wing complaint that universities need to be run more like a business is a bizarre accusation to make against an American industry whose products dominate the world market to a degree found in very few other fields, with customers who, by the way, compete ferociously for the privilege of purchasing our product despite its rapidly rising price. Following the money, in fact, reveals things that these business-minded critics of higher education would largely prefer to keep hidden. As I've argued before, the tuition students pay to take humanities courses more than covers the costs of these relatively inexpensive departments. And higher education in the hard sciences is actually a loss leader, whereby the basic research, long-shot investments, and the training of workers are mostly handled by the public sector, in this case, public universities. The private sector then arrogates the resulting profitable phase and sneers at public universities, like other similarly looted public enterprises, as wasteful. It's the intellectual equivalent of the giveaway of public lands to large sector, private sector, drillers, miners, frackers, and loggers who skim off the short-term profits and repay the commons with toxic air and water, climate change, and a despoiled landscape, which are mere externalities to the internal logic of a monetary profit system. No sane citizenry judges the value of its elementary education by whether it turns an immediate profit. The same should be true for higher education. And the exploitative fiascos of for-profit institutions over the past few years provide the starkest kind of warning, despite the efforts of our current Secretary of Education to pretend not to know that. Teaching among Homo sapiens differs from the teaching within other species precisely in this deferred and indirect mode of reward. Ethologists have observed that when chimpanzees teach each other, I'm quoting from a high-ranking ethologist here, when chimpanzees do that, there is always some direct payoff to the trainer, for whom the novice is trained to perform some service. In contrast, full-blown human pedagogy presupposes, first, the disposition to invest time in training without any immediate return. Secondly, pedagogy involves a sophisticated aesthetic judgment of what constitutes a good performance. I think the connection between humanity and humanities could hardly be clearer. Even the Obama White House rated our institutions of higher learning by the ratio of their expense to the salaries of their recent graduates. And under this system, a student who graduates to a minimum wage job, flipping burgers, is a bigger credit to that institution than one who goes on and is studying at a great medical school, for example. Quantification can make even smart people stupid. The instrumentalist economic view of the humanities is a mistake inadvertently aggravated sometimes by leftist scholars who treat scholarship as worthless unless it can be harnessed to their presentist causes. Humanists need to recognize the untapped value of their fields in programs like Bryonn's. And in fact, the success of Shakespeare programs for prisoners has been widely documented, in fact, documentaried, or whatever the verb would be. But we need to recognize also the hidden costs of turning the humanities primarily into a kind of liberationist branch of social science. The loss, I think, of a more durable ability to speak truth to power, as it was mentioned before, but maybe more to whisper behind power's back until the truth is shared widely enough to be speakable. In times no less fraught than ours, the arts of the distant past have provided crucial and consoling perspectives on the embattled present, and discoveries whose value became apparent only in a distant future. So, of course the liberal arts are embattled. That's what's bound to happen when you're fighting a well-armed opponent over something important. A crisis in the humanities doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the humanities any more than crises in Poland and Czechoslovakia at the start of World War II meant there was anything inherently wrong with Poland and Czechoslovakia. Except maybe, and the analogy to the humanities may be illuminating here, a shortage of the latest weaponry and the lack of a self-perpetuating, fanatically narrowed ideology. Combating the ills of higher education, especially in the arts and humanities, will be impossible unless we recognize them as symptoms of the struggle against a neoliberal market model that considers ruthless economic competition, the so-called real world and its bottom lines, to be a fundamental truth about human life. Universities, I think, can tell us something else. Thanks.
Robert, thank you so much. And to each of our guests, thank you for those terrific presentations. Let's take a minute, stand up, stretch out for just a second, rehearse a question, a comment, an idea that might connect some of the points being made here, and we'll be back online in 60 seconds. Thank you. Everybody, thanks so much. I think that after those 4 fantastic presentations, there's a ton that we can start off with, so I'm not going to launch anything out as a softball to get this going. I'm going to turn it over to the 4 of you. Thoughts or comments that might connect what it is you brought to the stage tonight with other things said over the last half hour, 45 minutes?
So the only question I want to start off with is to ask Bryonn, is he the most naive amongst us, or is he the most realistic amongst us? Is he trying to actually abandon the university, or is he trying to actually bring it in the place where it's most needed? Idealizing the university through the next instantiation. Which one is it?
What if it's neither?
Oh, it's always that.
Who said that?
Yeah. I like it. I like it.
Who said that? Oh, please say more.
I just think you're trying to simplify what Professor Bain did by his presentation by trying to make it either or. And I think there's actually a gray area within that where it is neither either of those.
All I want to say is that's a terrific move, but you should also then be able to read my question at multiple levels. Was I really sincere in asking the question in either or?
In that case, I'd respond with, are you sincere in being here?
Yes. Sincerity is one of the things that we can talk about.
I think this container can hold more than I think we've challenged it to hold, right? You know, and I gotta say, Dean Steele, you know, it's our first time meeting, and you know, I may be treading on thin ice in some ways, but I was disturbed by your opening. You know, like to start off the conversation about the university with Europe. I mean, that Eurocentric framing for me is, it frustrates my sense of finding the roots of this enterprise of higher education in the Asian and African antecedents which predate Europe's high civilizations, right? You can make the argument that these pre-European examples of higher education, of learning, you know, didn't have a sense of freedom that European institutions have celebrated. But whether or not they actually embrace those lofty ideals they celebrated, I think is a question which remains unanswered. And so, you know, the Moors were in Europe, African and Asian people, for 800 years, from 711 to 1492, right? During these dark ages, this time where Europe, you know, half the population was decimated by the Black Plague, like we had something to do with it, right? You know, you know, and then immediately afterwards, you know, 1400s, 1500s, we have this explosion of ideas. Well, who was bringing architecture and philosophy and science and mathematics and hygiene to Europe during that period? But the black and brown people that came from Asia and Africa to Europe. And, you know, we don't celebrate them, right, in this very anti-Islamic, Islamophobic, you know, moment that we're living in. We don't celebrate them, their Africanness, their Asianness, in the way that we have exalted all things European, all things white. And that is frustrating to me. And I think, you know, we see evidence of it. You know, if you look at, I have my father, so, you know, I have to watch all the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. And we see celebrated there, who? Leonardo, Donatello, Michelangelo, right? all the great artists, right, who lived while African and Asian people were in Europe bringing art, bringing philosophy, bringing all the things that universities, I think, elevate to the highest level to Europeans in Spain. And if you've been to Alhambra, one of those beautiful palaces in all of Europe, I'll just end by saying this. There on the wall is the plaque, which says in 1492, Columbus stood here and asked for the funds from Isabella and Ferdinand to get the ships to come over to the New World. And it was the same year that we pushed the Moors out of Spain. I think those connections are connections I want to make. And I love everything else you said. But I think we can expand the container to include, to embrace all of humanity in our historical understanding of what the university and in our future imagination of what it might be.
Terrific, thank you.
To me, this goes also to the question of relevance, because it's an argument that I get involved with fairly often since I mostly teach Shakespeare. And people think this is kind of ancient and distant. But in fact, I think it's an opportunity actually to watch a rehearsal for the kind of multicultural crises of our own century. Because, as I explained it there, the Renaissance happens because you have these, you have Islamic forces pushing Jewish scholars out of Constantinople who are then bringing ancient knowledge from North Africa into the Christian West. I mean, it is an intensely multicultural moment, and we think of it with this kind of reverence that goes with some of that Eurocentric naming. But in fact, I think it's important for us to recognize how much richness emerged exactly out of the fact that these were cultures in conflict. And I think, particularly in a kind of selfish way, I'd say within certain artistic media, such as drama, in which different points of view can be brought into collision with each other. I don't think you would have had Shakespeare able to write and the great drama of that period if you hadn't had that collision. In some ways, the same reason you have, 400 BC's great drama in Greece, not only because of the limited democracy that we were talking about, but because you have a seagoing culture that is attempting to be democratic, encountering all these cultural differences and having to work their way through that. So we can look back, all these many years, taking back across the whole landscape that you're talking about, Brett, and see just how much what looks like education in kind of a narrow curriculum of classic works can in fact turn into a conversation about the importance of all the integration of views that a university is, matching, we hope, the whole society.
I want to take Jerry's question in a different direction. We were looking at an example of something that is clearly a university happening in a site that is clearly not part of our 419 or 420 acres. Something one can't help but notice is that this university comprises lots and lots of functions that wouldn't be described by any of the things we talked about. On the field, at the Rose Bowl, creativity and critique are not necessarily the first thing that come to mind. In the health practices that UCLA is buying up across the city, I feel sure that the kinds of values we're talking about here are not placed front and center. So I think besides everything else we're reckoning with the fact that UCLA as a university is also an enormous enterprise that includes lots of other things. And I think for me that raises a kind of caution. We can be as idealistic about the university and its functions as we like, and meanwhile we have to reckon with all of those things that the university is doing that are for ends of profit, that do have to do with maintaining a sort of, let's say, a spreadsheet analyzable position in a particular city. Personally, I don't think that some of our sporting events are intrinsic to the project, and I worry about how the university becomes something else as it engages, perhaps for very good reasons, but engages in things that are further and further from this basic set of functions that we seem to have focused on in this discussion. I do regard education in any location associated with UCLA as part of the university function. It's with some of the other functions that I begin to worry a bit.
But what does the near future look like? So part of the challenge is, if we think moments of distress or great fracture or moments where there's a lot of mixing going on, and surely there's a lot of mixing going on and a lot of stress in Los Angeles, if those are meant to be generative moments that actually change the way the university feels and operates, do you have any optimism about what the university will become in 10, 15, 30 years? The hydraulic pressures to be, again, economically self-justicatory, right, will actually incline us in one direction. Market logic has, neoliberal market logic is very, very, very powerful. And as the state recedes in its sponsorship, I mean, are you optimistic that you can actually change the university? Will this be what you demonstrate as an existence proof? Will that be something that in the history books we say, oh yeah, he could do that once, but we stopped doing that? Or do you imagine it changing much more aggressively in that way?
I think it has to change to survive, right? I think it necessarily has to change to function in the foreseeable future. There was a time when the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan really had traction, right? To say now that you actually can prepare students for some market economy that some job market they're gonna go into in 5 years, it's ridiculous, right? We have no idea the world we're preparing folks to go into, right? But we do know that whatever world they're gonna go into, they're gonna need some basic things. They're gonna need creativity. They're going to need the ability to adapt to whatever the situations emerge, to the next Uber, Lyft, Facebook, Amazon, all the data landlords, right? They're going to need the ability to adapt. They're going to need to know collaboration. They're going to need to know how to actually work with other people, which is the essence, I think, of the university model in all of the examples we've seen. How do you work with folks who you completely disagree with, who you think are completely wrong, right? And then I think they're going to need to have critical thinking. And so I think those as fundamentals, rather than sort of preparing folks for sort of this very linear assembly line, culture that they're walking into, that model of preparation at the university, if it hasn't completely eroded, it's on its way. And so thinking about new ways to organize this enterprise, I think, are an essential part of what has to happen. And so involving the voices of folks who actually have been left out of the conversation, right, is an inevitable outcome of that necessity.
So, certainly one of the startling features of UCLA at this particular moment is, in fact, the scale of that community left out in so many ways. Let's say, just to take a simple figure, like 137,000 applications. If one thinks of that as the number of individuals that just in the past year had expressed an interest in being in the seats that are in this room, for example, does create a kind of a frame of reference to think about what the university is beyond just those of us that might be lucky enough to either sit on a stage this evening or in this audience for this kind of a conversation. And one of the interesting parts of the history of universities is the way in which they've struggled with this question of not just what they are, but really literally where they are. And I think, Bryonn, as your work, I think most forcefully draws our attention. How is it that a university can exist beyond the boundaries of a 400-acre campus in a very real sense, and in a setting that we know now really can't afford in so many ways to have more bodies sitting literally physically within it?
Well, to your point, I have to say, we are in the most applied to institution in the country, probably the world, because of those numbers. We're also in the city that incarcerates more people than any other city in the world. So those contradictions are something that I think we need to be wrestling with, working to reconcile. One of the big challenges in the work, I've been here 3 years, right? So one of the big challenges, and I've talked to Jerry about this, is we as we work to develop a way so that some of our incarcerated students can earn degrees. Proposition 57 gives time off your sentence if you earn degrees, if you complete courses, and you can come home sooner, you get your freedom sooner. And so there's something called the residency requirement, which is intended so that transfers can't just come and do 1 year here and then actually get a UCLA degree. You have to be in residency for roughly half your time. But as things change, these shifts happen, we are also forced to think about, what does residency mean? What does it mean to be in residence at UCLA? Does it mean you're in residence here on campus with the bricks and mortar? Or does it mean that you're in residence with the faculty, with the distinguished faculty and students? You're actually in dialogue. Because if that's the new definition of residency, you can be in a maximum security prison and be in residency if the students and faculty are actually there. And so those are some of the redefinitions that I think we're going to be forced to think about as we move forward.
Terrific. And I'm seeing the time, and I think we can open up the conversation across the room. We have a couple of microphones that should all be ready to be around. Do we have microphones in the audience?
Hi. Professor.
Just a second, if we can carry on. There was one here, and then I'll come back to you on this side, okay? Yes, please. Is there right here, and then we'll come to you. Right here.
Yeah, thank you everyone very much for coming to speak about universities. I think my question kind of alludes to what Dean Steele was talking about, how the issue of access to universities, especially right now, is very pressing. I just wanted to pose the question of, since there have been many different techniques people have tried to, say, deal with selectivity. For example, Harvard, MIT, Penn State, Arizona State have all experimented with online education and massive enrollment courses. So what are maybe some more unorthodox ways that we can expand public access to universities and the work and education that they all do?
Yeah, I mean, you know, just to set some tables, I mean, the question is it increasing access to universities generally, whatever we would call higher education? Is it access to elite universities such as UCLA? And then it raises this kind of odd question about our relationship to eliteness, because on the one hand, we all love the idea of access, but the truth is, depending on how you define elite, many of you chose UCLA in part because you thought it was elite. I think that's just true in all kinds of ways, descriptively accurate. And we have to both own it and try to figure out what that means to both celebrate access and eliteness. So if you thought, look, we just want to get great content, let's use YouTube channels, these things are available, these conversations are available to the public writ large in some sense, there's a whole bunch of education you can get right now for free if you search for it. You can get a lot of knowledge. But the question about what we're really trying to build as a university and whether, again, I'm deeply skeptical that purely online mediated formats currently is enough to actually create that which we seek in a university. We're trying to figure out what it is that we want to do. I'd like to think, I'd love to hear people's thoughts about, like, if the challenge is how can we increase access to, by definition, an elite institution, not just something defined as a degree-granting institution, right? Because there are lots of universities, and maybe we could scale up. I think the harder challenge is how do you increase access to an elite institution? And I'm just going to define elite as UCLA. Is that even something we should be trying to do? Is that the wrongly, do you care about eliteness? Do you care about eliteness? Is Shakespeare elite?
Well, Shakespeare was not considered intellectually elite in his time. He did plays which were kind of dishonorable things that spoke to a large public audience. So there were plenty of people. In fact, Ben Jonson put out a collection of his works. Ben Jonson was Shakespeare's great competitor. And somebody wrote an epigram that became famous on him that said, "Pray tell us, Ben, where does the mystery lurk? What others call a play, you call a work." The idea that somehow this could be any serious intellectual material at all was completely missing from the culture. It was as if somebody had said, here's, you know, your $300 leather-bound edition of the complete scripts from Laverne and Shirley or something like that. It was just not to be taken seriously. And I think it's very difficult to predict what will be taken seriously in the long run. But I do think that the concept of an elite institution does not necessarily have to correlate with the concept of certain elitist characteristics in the character of it and certain criteria that have been conventionally used for that. I do think we need to maintain a certain sense of the elite, but a broader sense.
And I didn't mean to hijack your question, but I think, you know, again, access, if it's access to something that in some ways no one wants because it's so easy to get and it's low quality, however you define, whether it's food, whether it's, you know, like lots of public education that we've abandoned effectively in all kinds of ways. You know, it's not like you can't get kids sometimes into public schools that are oftentimes completely defunded. So, you know, that's why I think it's really challenging to think about, again, access when in the background is eliteness.
I've had some thoughts about access that were actually part of a lecture I was giving in China, a very different setting for this kind of discussion. But you know, the reflection was that all of us, have more access to more knowledge right now than we did 1 minute ago, and that any of our ancestors did. I mean, in a certain sense, getting the knowledge around is not the problem anymore. The problem is creating this. The problem is creating a setting in which I can ask you a question, I can demand an answer of some sort, and you can ask it right back. Orchestrating the experience and maintaining the experience at a high level, as you were clearly doing in these settings as well, is the university. It's transportable. I don't know about the residence part, but I do want to address the space question. Space, a bounded space that stands for that project. Have you noticed the way that universities function in the American landscape? This is where we stage our battles. You know, Milo Yiannopoulos doesn't go to the Ford Motor Company to give a speech. He goes to Berkeley. Why? Because Berkeley's the place where free speech troubles take place. That's the place to stage it. Any university campus is the place to stage it. That's what we do. And there are reasons for that. And we go back to the kinds of things we've been talking about here. I didn't touch on elitism, but or on the question of the elite. But look, faculty members are now called on to educate a group of people who have more access to knowledge than we ever had along the way. Education is changing in that way. We're called to a different kind of partnership with students. We're called to be learners far more than we were in earlier generations, I would say. And I think the eliteness of an institution is going to derive from the ability to recognize that, to recognize where you are in your level of knowledge and in your level of curiosity and creativity, and how we can add value to that through these kinds of encounters.
Thank you. Right up here.
By the way, thank you so much for inviting the public into this, this series. As a former Bruin, I feel that UCLA has never left me in a way. And you've been talking about the functions of a university and what a university means, but it also, I'm really curious to know what you feel it means to be specifically a UCLA, a product of UCLA. You said Berkeley has the idea of, you think of Berkeley, you think of free speech. When you think of UCLA, I know what I think of UCLA, but I'd be fascinated to know what you think the identity and what the shared values of UCLA are. And what that means for my daughter who's going here now.
I mean, for me, the first thing I think of is the multiple forms of access that this place does allow. I think of the high proportion of transfer students in the classes that we teach. I think of the high proportion of Pell Grant recipients. I think of the high proportion of first-generation students. This is not to the exclusion of other people who are not first-generation. That's not the point. The point is that in this space, those encounters happen. And I do buy the social mobility, the engine of social mobility notion of what this particular university is. And in the humanities, it's impossible to ignore the fact that we're surrounded by communities that want and need to be represented on this campus for their traditions of knowledge. A Center for Iranian Studies, for example, is part of the way that this city represents itself in its institution of knowledge. Center for Jewish Studies does some of the same work. Our university is a reflection of the investments in knowledge that the communities that have come to Los Angeles have shown over generations and generations. That's me.
I think of UCLA as an institution that is committed to giving everyone a fair shot. We've always punched above our weight, and we've always hustled. And I like those attributes, and I want to understand ourselves in those ways. Nothing is given to us, nothing is guaranteed, but we have hustled and we've done way more than we thought was possible. And I think that kind of framing is the kind of hungry, entrepreneurial, but both immigrant, with an experience-based understanding of how to again, pivot knowledge into action. I mean, that's what I love about a UCLA state of mind. And it might be just aspirational.
Yes, right here.
Hi, just to quote Vice Chancellor Kang, you said in your speech that as students we shouldn't have to defend our curiosity, and I first and foremost want to thank you for your engagement. That being said, one of the things I noticed with Professor Bain's video, the first thing I noticed actually was the bleeping out of the last names of those who were not incarcerated. You've spoken a little bit on elitism, the fact that there are all men sitting on that panel. If any of you choose to get married, it is not your names that you're giving up. There's a lot of power in names, specifically last names. And personally, as somebody who's been running away from my last name my whole life, I'm curious to know how we as students, as professors, as teaching assistants, as administrators, as deans, how we hide behind the name of UCLA. I think it is Professor Schaberg, you mentioned, the irony of UCLA buying up property and health centers all over the city of Los Angeles, and comparing that to football and the rising cost the rising salaries of football coaches at this institution. And I think the thought of even thinking about friends who have played football for this institution, spending the rest of their lives paying this institution for the very health issues that they have gotten at this cost. I'm curious just how we are all hiding behind this name of UCLA. Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, I have a moral stance with regard to football. I don't think college students should be playing football. I realize that there are implications. Oh, excuse me. I have a moral stance with regard to football. I don't think college students should be playing football. I have 2 sons. I wouldn't put them on a football field. That's me. Universities approach such questions by asking, well, how can one move with the NCAA to change the order of football? Things are taken on in a multi-institutional approach. That's my token of hiding behind UCLA right there, right? It's recognizing the necessity for institutional means to reach institutional ends when it comes to politically difficult problems like the question of whether a university should be playing football. And I think it's inevitable, those kinds of changes, the rise of a moral position, if indeed this moral position does eventually gain some general following among students, among faculty, it's a gradualism. It's a matter of building on go ahead.
Is that morality that you hold against it a privilege? Is that not a privilege? Are there people all over the country who have no problem with putting their children in football because they see that as a way out?
Certainly. I would admit that there's some privilege in the fact that I did not need to send my sons onto a football field. But if asking it from a position of leadership in university, my question would be, how can I make sure that the university reaches into many communities and offers access to many communities without requiring the costs that you pointed out?
Thank you. I see right here, there's a microphone. Sorry, right here? You got a mic? You have a mic, but not a question. Right here, there's a microphone and a question. Yes?
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I've got 2 questions, if you will indulge me. And they're both based on the fact that I think we've been talking about universities as dynamic systems that are sensitive to the needs of the people that inhabit it. But I've actually found a lot of systems to be quite archaic and resistant to change. So if we could talk about, 1, the application process, because there's been a lot of discourse about the need for declaration of ethnicity on the application. So I'm wondering if you guys have any opinions on what you would like to add or maybe remove from the application. And number 2, I'd love to talk about tenure and whether tenure is a form of protection of the noblest pursuit of truth, or if it's a protection against maybe subpar pedagogy or allegations of sexual assault and such.
Thank you.
Easy questions.
Yeah.
There's 2 easy questions. One of the 2 questions, really, admissions, access. And
yeah, I could talk a little bit about admissions, although I think the second question is actually far more interesting. Title IX reports to me, and so just to loop back to the other question about are we hiding behind a name, I think privilege is everywhere. We always hide behind lots of things. The real challenge for maturity, emotional and intellectual, is like, can you see it? Can you own it? Can you ask about it? So I think on the one hand, I'm a professor as well. I get tenure and never give it up. I mean, that's the point. That is definitely the point. It's a nice gig. But as an administrator that has to hold very powerful people accountable, whether it's for sexual harassment, racist humor that really was never funny, certainly is not funny now, and actually undermines the learning environment. Those are really hard challenges because like my shops do investigations, ask and answer hard questions that are written down in policies. But then to hold anyone who is a part of the academic senate accountable, there's a wholly different set of adversarial procedures that are internal to the senate itself, in part because read most charitably, it's because we cannot let administrators, staff, political pressures that might go this way or that way, depending on what is sexy or hot or beautiful or right or politically correct at any given moment, it can't undermine the security of these special senators, these special academics, from speaking truth to power. And a part of me understands it, but a part of me has a really hard time. How is that just not calcifying a particular set of privilege where powerful people misbehave all the time? And in some ways, you've been romantic about the nature of what it means to actually have academic freedom and to actually be protected. I think there are huge downsides to it sometimes. And I'm just trying to figure out how we could actually stop hiding behind, again, that mask of tenure.
Right, so there's lots of ways to go with these questions. I mean, I think I'm biased by my upbringing. You know, I'm the child of somebody who was very severely saved in some ways by academic freedom from McCarthyist assaults. I probably wouldn't be around if that weren't true. So I certainly have my own personal investment in that. I think on the broader question of tenure, you know, obviously these things are both going to be true. You have people who perform poorly and have the privilege of staying around and keeping other people from getting good jobs and keeping students from having good teachers. And it's very difficult to figure out how you separate that from the many people who are doing superb work and are doing work in certain ways they would never be able to do if they did not have that situation. I couldn't have been working on this book for 8 years and saying certain kinds of things that are going to be unpopular in the book if that weren't there. I think a university does have to be protected in some ways from certain kinds of transient political pressures. I do think that that's important. What comes along with that are lots of other residues, things that are held back, traditions, belief systems, ways of looking at the world, and populations of the university campus. And that's why, to go back to your question about UCLA, I don't know, hiding behind a name, I mean, this is the question. Are you going to affiliate yourself with institutions that have lots of significance and power? And how much of a compromise are you willing to make to recognize that all institutions are compromised, all institutions have forces within them that are self-interested in perpetuating, protecting themselves, that may find ways to disguise themselves as pure benevolence. I think you have to work on the inside of institutions sometimes. This one seems to be one that you can influence, but there's no question that there are going to be residues of everything else about the country and the state and the city we're in that are going to affect, in some ways harmfully affect, the people who engage with us.
Thank you. I think it's time for a last question for tonight's last question, right over here on this side.
Hi, I had a question regarding not the application, but the admissions. And it seems like everyone is welcome to the fact that every student obviously should have the opportunity to express their opinion, and through this we welcome diversity. But to me it seems like the admissions system, like it's unsettling that some candidates are denied that opportunity to be here. And I'm just wondering, what do you think of our admission system that we currently have? And do you think it's a bit too idealistic to say that we welcome an opportunity for like success, like an equal chance, when we deny specific individuals that privilege?
Thank you.
You know, I think it is. I think it's latent in the question. If more people want to get in than there are slots to get in, then there has to be a selection system. You could do it through lottery. You could do it through some conception of merit. You could do it through auction. You could do it through all kinds of competitions in different kinds of ways. And we have some confluence of those things. I think, to be honest, in some sense, the fact that we have a university where more people want to attend as students, more people want to teach as faculty, frankly, more people want to work as staff, then we can actually have. That in itself is not a sin. The real question is whether we've created the conditions of the possibility of competition and success such that people have a fair shot. That has not been defined by any stretch, and that's where all the hard work is. But the fact that some people get in and some people don't, in and of itself, of all the problems that I have with this university, so that I'm not hiding behind a name and instead making it better from the inside, that alone, at that abstract level, is not what keeps me up at night.
I think, you know, a lot of truth in sort of what you just, how you laid it out, Jerry. I think one of the failures of the conversation around admissions and affirmative action is that there has been very little mention or recognition of the fact that, you know, the inclusion of people of color, especially on campuses like this in the last half a century, wasn't just about benefiting them, but actually white people are better off because they have black and brown people in class. Men are better off having women in their class because it's a better preparation for the world you're going to walk into after you leave this campus, right? And so I think that benefit has been lost in the conversation as if it's sort of just a sort of narrow special interest discussion. I think this is one of the dangers of elitism. Lonnie Guinier wrote a really great book called Tyranny of the Meritocracy, which I will not try to like summarize in full now, but I will just offer this. Some of what is lost when you don't have those folks at the table is brought to light by a conversation I had with my grandfather, who passed just a few years ago at 103 years old. When I went to Trinidad, which he never left, he never came to the United States, he said, y'all can have that, right? I went to him at 100 years old and I said, Grandpa, you know, Emmanuel Bain, one of those names that's not our own, not an African name, right? So talking about hiding behind names. Right? I said, Grandpa, what do you eat to be 100 years old? You know? I went to college in 1991, became a vegan at first and vegetarian, you know, thinking I'm doing something right. And I looked at him and said, what do you eat to live to be 100 years old, Grandpa? And he said to me, he said, boy, I eat everything but people. And he totally shattered my whole vegan macrobiotic theory, right? You know? But he ate the chickens from under the house. He ate the cows that he saw slaughtered, so now they were killed. They weren't filled with hormones and drugs. And so here we are, here I was with all of my very elite education and insight and information. And his good country victuals, along with the community that has surrounded him, right, had kept him alive much longer than most human beings ever live. And I feel like when we think about those who've been left out of the conversation, like my 103-year-old grandfather, we think about the insight, the brilliance of folks who've been denied access to these elite spaces. I think we do all of ourselves are done a disservice, but I think about how to actually broaden the opportunity for more folks to have access to what we understand is a limited resource, but can be reimagined in terms of how we offer it to the world at large.
Thank you. Robert.
Just quickly on this, I have a very subjective experience as somebody who's mostly focused on undergraduate teaching, and it probably would spin off into the whole rant that is contained within my one mention of quantification as a problem in my opening remarks. But I do have the subjective sense that as the competition has gotten greater for places at UCLA, and as students are required more or less to have perfect GPAs and nearly perfect other scores in order to become students here, I do feel that I have more students who are defensive, who are trying not to say anything wrong, which is not a great way to learn, more students who are holding back and simply trying to get cleanly through this process to whatever comes next, instead of sort of getting down to the whole complicated mess of knowledge and shared life that a campus offers. So my one reservation, my special reservation about the current admission system, which may be necessary because of the numbers, is that through certain kinds of quantitative measures, we may be missing out on a lot of students who would be really great powers and great people who would grow immensely here if given those opportunities.
That's right. Thank you. And as closing remarks, just anything final from you?
The final remark for me would be, never mistake being elite with being elitist. I view all of you as actually elite. And for the fact that you are here at UCLA, for the skills that you've gained, for the contestations you've experienced, both pleasant and oftentimes quite unpleasant, you've survived in resilient ways. And you have become, in some sense, elite. Now the challenge then is to do something with that, and my ask is to help solve problems that make you proud to actually wear the banner of UCLA.
Thank you.
I would give that up. So A mentor of mine shared with me this worker's anthem, and I'll end with this for me. Calculate carefully and ponder it well, and remember this when you do. My two hands are mine to sell. They built your machines. They can stop them too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Robert?
I've tried to follow Bryonn once. I'm not going to try to follow him.
Wonderful. Everybody join me in thanking Robert, Bryonn, Jerry, David, and to thank all of you for this final session. These seats have been filled every week. Thank you all for the journey. Tonight's reception, by the way, which is right around the corner next door, is for everybody in the room. Please come in and join us for a glass of wine, something to drink. Students, enjoy week 10. Enjoy every minute of finals week next week. Thank you for this experiment. We're going to be putting all of this material together. It is online, to remind you. Our guest presentations tonight, these video recordings, all of our previous guests. Please enjoy it there and contribute in the forum that's available. Thank you, everybody.